Okay, you guys, time for a YouTube video update, or excuse me, that's next week actually. This is a roundtable discussion, however, of sorts. As you can see, I have my roundtable and my microphone. So, without further ado, welcome to Dialogue. Like I said, today is a roundtable discussion. This really today, folks, is my podcast live. I'm going to be talking about, what I talked about in the last 4 episodes of my podcast that I dropped, for about 30 minutes or 45 minutes of your time here. I will be talking about some NBA stuff, some NFL stuff, including the Super Bowl and All-Star Weekend, the NBA playoffs, and my favorite sport ever, of course, wrestling, and perhaps some movies and some other stuff. So grab some popcorn and sit back and relax. Again, welcome to Dialogue again. And without my introduction this time, let's just jump right in. Like I said, I finally posted 4 episodes of my podcast that I've been postponing and have been wanting to post for a while now because, of course, I am a procrastinator. One of them was, yes, about the NFL Super Bowl and NBA All-Star Weekend from earlier this year, from this past season, earlier this year in February, because, again, yes, I am a procrastinator, which, of course, though, are the big events every year. The Super Bowl and NBA All-Star Weekend are 2 of the major events, every single year. Of course, the big thing this year, however, though, was Jalen Hurts, of course, with the on the NFL side of things. And then on the NBA side of things, you have Mac McClung, aka the, now that what I like to call him, the white man who can jump, and I say that respectfully, of course, as a joke. Rihanna's halftime performance and other stuff also. I talked about all of this in my podcast episode, but I want to emphasize in my roundtable discussion here. Now without further ado, let's jump in. The thing with the Super Bowl, of course, is the halftime show, and let's start with that. There's really nothing wrong with the Super Bowl. That's mainly All-Star Weekend, with the format changes and all of that, and then recent news of what Adam Silver, has been wanting to do with All-Star Weekend. But the halftime show at the Super Bowl is still obviously a heavy topic of conversation. I was saying in my podcast episode, actually, some artists I would like to see, perform at the Super Bowl. And of course, there are lots of artists that obviously we can all think of that we would like to see perform at the Super Bowl. But for me personally, starting with, I would like to see perform, who I would like to see perform at the Super Bowl is starting with, Frank Ocean. And as you guys can see, I actually have a lovely picture of Frank Ocean, behind me here. I am a huge Frank Ocean fan. Frank Ocean, for anyone who knows me, knows that I love Frank Ocean. Everyone who knows me knows that I adore Frank Ocean. Frank Ocean would be fantastic to me, to perform at the NFL Super Bowl halftime show. I mean, a whole Frank Ocean Super Bowl set at the Super Bowl would just be great. I can already picture it. Picture it now. It would be bigger than Coachella, Frank Ocean at Coachella. It would be bigger than Frank Ocean performing live at the Grammys. Any performance set that he's done at any festival, over the past few years or so, over the past decade would be, I think a Super Bowl performance from Frank Ocean would outshine any performance Frank Ocean has ever done, or anytime he's ever made any type of headline news. Now, anyway, with that being said, I know I'm going to catch slack for this, but another artist that I would like to see perform at the NFL Super Bowl halftime show is my main man, C Breezy, Chris Brown, the president of my light-skinned crew. I would love to see Chris Brown perform at the NFL Super Bowl one year. And that's because, a Chris Brown performance to me would be awesome. I'm just saying, he's supremely talented, and I admire his gift. Anyone who knows me knows that I love C Breezy these days, when he's just making his music and tapping into his creative juices. Again, he's supremely talented, and I admire his gift, especially his gift of dancing. Definitely a Chris Brown set at the Super Bowl also would be sort of worth all of our while. The dancing, I really do admire Chris Brown's definitely his dancing, but I admire all of his musical gift, basically. But yes, both the Frank Ocean and Chris Brown set at the Super Bowl would be a sight to see, and something for the new age. Now, with that said, I just wanted to say that the Super Bowl obviously is known for trying to, get the biggest and most popular artists at the time to perform, and they're good at it now. The past 2 performances with Rihanna and The Weeknd, exemplify that, over the past couple of years. Even if as viewers and audiences, as the audience and viewers at home, we have a tendency to pick everything apart and overly criticize or overly glorify it. But artists these days, like Rihanna and The Weeknd, especially, do a great job of overcoming, that type of media hype and all that extra stuff. Rihanna especially these days, is just glowing, and I love Rihanna, as I said on my podcast. I love her and ASAP Rocky. That's a different story. They're one of my favorite celebrity couples, by the way. Both are edgy and into fashion and each other, apparently. But with that said, I would love to see Rihanna perform at the Super Bowl again, actually, and with her man, ASAP Rocky, actually. An ASAP and Rihanna music collab, while we're on the subject, would be a great idea. Or just ASAP and the ASAP Mob should perform at the Super Bowl. Since ASAP Rocky, has obviously gotten his stock up now. As I said, he's dating Rihanna now, so we know him and the ASAP Mob, aka the Wu-Tang Clan, a little bit better now. ASAP Rocky's name is a little bit more, has a little bit more hype to it. He's dating Rihanna, of course, so that's a good thing. Now, an ASAP theme, Super Bowl would be just great. And for this reason, it would be great for music. It would be great, obviously, for hip hop, of course. I was talking also, on the podcast episode about how the Super Bowl halftime show still uses the pop stars. And that the emphasis on pop is right. They still use the pop rock bands. They still lean toward the pop and rock bands. The halftime performance at the Super Bowl is still controversial and biased in the sense that they choose the rock pop bands, and leave hip hop and R&B and urban music behind, sort of. It was only until recently when Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Mary J. Blige, performed at the Super Bowl in a hip hop themed extravaganza. If you guys remember that Super Bowl halftime performance, in which the Super Bowl, that Super Bowl has chosen hip hop artists to perform. And I'm talking, yes, exclusively, and of course, music has evolved over the years, but I'm talking exclusively about hip hop. Well, we need to see more of that. And if the 2021, performance, of Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Mary J. Blige, doesn't prove that, I don't know what to say. The Super Bowl halftime performance, format certainly does need to change. It just does. The discrepancy still between, black artists and white artists, or black music and rock and pop music and urban music and hip hop music and again, yeah, pop music and rap music when it comes to big events like the Super Bowl, just needs to change. And with that being said too, if you guys look behind me, also to my left here, I also have a Funko Pop, it is, of the late great Tupac Shakur, of course, and rest in peace to Tupac. As a side note, of course, everything going on with solving, that very controversial, highly publicized murder case, or assassination of the late great Tupac Shakur is big news these days. So obviously rest in peace and shout out to Tupac. And of course, this Funko Pop I have behind me of Tupac Shakur. So everyone say hi to Tupac, of course. Now, with that being said, I'm talking about big events, like the Super Bowl, and the formatting that needs to be done. So yes, the formatting does need to change at the Super Bowl as well. Especially with the hip hop, that the hip hop thing that I was just talking about, there needs to be more emphasis definitely on hip hop at the Super Bowl. So like I said, it wasn't really the format though, that needs to change, but let's talk about Super Bowl stuff. Over the years, the Super Bowl and the NFL in general has gone through a lot, a lot of politics and sports stuff. This past year, it was Jalen Hurts who took over the NFL world, of course. I mean, let me say that again. Jalen Hurts, you guys, in the Philadelphia Eagles took over the NFL world. Hurts flew in like an eagle. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Jalen Hurts. What Jalen Hurts did with the Eagles this past season was something else. And I can't wait to see what he does, obviously, more along the lines, as we move further along, inching toward the Super Bowl, this season in the NFL. The season, obviously, NFL season is well underway. It's already December, almost actually in a couple of hours. It'll actually be December. But yes, it's already December essentially then, right? Christmas time is already coming, and the NFL season every year obviously starts in August, and the Super Bowl is in February. So, come February time, I obviously can't wait to see where Jalen Hurts and the Eagles land, basically. But, again, the NFL season, again, the snow is coming and February is coming, but again, I've already talked about Jalen Hurts, and I'll talk more. I have the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, but shout out to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Speaking of the Super Bowl from last year, I had actually the Eagles, obviously the Eagles winning it. I was, leaning more toward the Eagles, but of course, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs did win the Super Bowl. Now, this Super Bowl in general, from this past year in February, was a memorable one, though. With that being said, the Chiefs and the Eagles, reminded me of one of those old school rivalries or classic football games, on Madden, even when you play Madden and, and you go head to head, one side picks one great franchise and another side picks the other, old school classic franchise, with the rain and the sleet and all that, when the weather affects everything or when throwback jerseys matter. I'd like to see the Chiefs and Eagles double back, by the way, in the Super Bowl. I'm not making any early predictions or anything, but I just would like to see it again. With that said, there's many things this NFL season that's interesting, obviously, and speaking of the Chiefs and the Eagles actually had obviously a showdown, obviously they had a showdown at the Super Bowl this past year, but they actually faced off also about 2 weeks ago. If you guys remember that, during Monday Night Football, the Chiefs and the Eagles went head to head again. And of course, the Eagles actually did win that game. So if that's any indication of what the Super Bowl will look like, or or what the Eagles are trying to do this year, we'll see if they can take if they can take down Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. And speaking of the Chiefs, of course, I was talking about Rihanna. Just as a side note, I was talking about Rihanna and A$AP Rocky earlier. Well, of course, the Travis Kelce and the news of him and Taylor Swift is huge news right now. So that's been affecting everything. So we'll see how that all pans out. And also, the Chiefs, by the way, and Patrick Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes and company, basically, they will travel to Green Bay to face off with the Green Bay Packers this coming Sunday, actually. So the Packers, speaking of the Chiefs also, my hometown Packers, I'm actually sitting at home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin right now. So the hometown Packers actually face off against the Chiefs. So Taylor Swift, obviously will be in town. And that's another one of my favorite celebrity couples, by the way, Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. Aren't they they're exciting, right? I mean, they're just amazing, I think. But with all of that being said, I just want to say, again, speaking of the Packers also, the NFL season this season, yes, is interesting. Aaron Rodgers, obviously, and going to the Jets, that was big news. And of course, shout out to A-Rod and Mr. Aaron Rodgers, who obviously is sitting on the sidelines now because he's been injured. But, even that, though, has, on the brighter side of things, there's been talk, obviously, of him even making a return this season, which is interesting. I won't fully give my full thoughts on that. I mean, I obviously think that A-Rod, should stay home and nurse his wounds, basically. I mean, he should, take the time and care that he needs instead of rushing a comeback, of course. He needs to take the time he needs to really, heal that injury, but again, on the flip side of it, I'm not against, obviously even teasing a comeback just to make us all happy. Of course, when Aaron Rodgers went down with that, with that injury, he didn't even get a chance to play with the Jets. And it was obviously just big news. So yeah, A-Rod and the Jets and his injury, of course, was big news. And of course, I talked about this on my podcast. I have to mention it. Odell Beckham Jr., OBJ, and the Ravens, of course, too, is heavy, NFL news this season. The Ravens are doing quite well, actually. Lamar Jackson is playing like MVP, that he is, of course. And OBJ also is playing like, the wide receiver that we've always we've always known, which I'll talk more on, of course. And with that being said, too, if you look on my right here, I actually have I have a Funko Pop also of Odell Beckham Jr., as you can see. Odell Beckham Jr., excuse me, my glasses fell off. Odell Beckham Jr. is one of my favorite, NFL players, of course. So yes, I have a Funko Pop of Odell Beckham Jr. sitting behind me, of course. So shout out to Odell Beckham Jr. He's actually in the Browns outfit in that Funko Pop, but it's all good though, you guys. But those are just some of the big things obviously going on in the NFL world this season. Now on to NBA All-Star Weekend from this past year, back in February. There are some interesting things that happened obviously during NBA All-Star Weekend also. And I just want to say, and also as a side note on my glasses, you can't see them here. I actually shouldn't disclose this information. One of my glasses broke, basically. They are broken as I'm wearing them right now. But that's a story for another day. But now on to NBA All-Star Weekend. The thing with All-Star Weekend, and like every year, was a lot. A lot to do with formatting changes and the audience's view of the NBA's ever-changing, rules every year. So let's start with this before we get to anything else. All-Star Weekend, first of all, was in Utah. So of course that means that Karl Malone, of course, was in attendance. And I just want to touch on that again. I talked about Karl Malone, the whole Karl Malone situation on my podcast. And I say all of what I'm going to say and what I'm saying now respectfully. I'm not going to sound off, on the NBA legend and just say anything insensitive, because he's just that. And that's what I think. A lot of people had a problem with that being said, with Karl Malone's attendance and much rather, his participation at NBA All-Star Weekend this past year back in February. Just to reiterate, there were a lot of people sounding off in tweets and memes. Of course, in this social media age, an age of hypersensitivity, there would be that, but I won't say I blatantly disagree with these folks and that I agree with Karl Malone and whatever choices, he made back in the day, which upset folks, but I just want to add a different perspective. That was the whole thing with my conversation on the podcast episode. I just wanted to, add my perspective, add a different perspective. It was All-Star Weekend, and I think it being in Utah and considering all of what Karl Malone gave to the game of basketball, his presence was necessary. I mean, if you're a basketball fan or analyst, Karl Malone's impact, on the world of basketball should resonate and be clear. If you're a social commentator and looking to be politically correct, then sure, some of that stuff, some of that personal stuff should be brought to the forefront. Journalism is different nowadays. In our digital age and the access to information being what it is, there is a resurgence of a different type of journalist or critic. We can look up information and conceive it, differently from what was 20 years ago. And I do agree, the facts are the facts. If Karl Malone did something, heinous, it should at least be brought to light and talked about. I can respect that. It's just that, like I said on the podcast episode, I agree with his basketball status. I also think we should look deeper into our criticism of him beyond means and our self-righteousness as a society. I mean, he's a man with a personal life, and our opinion of the fatherhood thing could be looked into more. I mean, he's remained out of the limelight for years, and that could be the reason why. He hasn't really spoken about the situation himself, the situation in question. I just think we should be, let bygones be bygones, especially during All-Star Weekend in Utah. It was it was a basketball weekend, and the basketball world should be more concerned with honoring one of their legends instead of tearing down. I mean, I get it. With that said, this could be a polarizing situation where people are arguing, perhaps, and I don't choose either side. Again, I just want to reiterate what I'm saying on my podcast. After all, it is about ability. From that standpoint, I do understand. But again, anything outside of that is kind of tricky. It's just our opinions and old opinions being revived. And without also understanding the necessity of having Karl Malone at one of your biggest events of the year in Utah. At the end of the day, it's business and it's basketball. We can't totally expect the NBA seriously, to write or X Karl Malone out of history, either. Again, it's tricky. I understand the folks who want to hold people accountable, want to hold Mr. Karl Malone accountable. But I also understand forgiveness in personal lives. I mean, why just single out Karl Malone? There's a long list of NBA players, with baby mama drama, especially in our generation today. I'm just saying, let's just, hold the mirror up to that a little bit. That's just me. Unless Karl Malone, again, unless it's something other than the story I've read, I'm sorry, but I have to still give the man his flowers, on an All-Star Weekend in Utah, after what he gave, to the Utah Jazz, franchise. I mean, if I'm the NBA, you have to look at it from their perspective. Not everything can be politically correct. But that's enough of that. That's just my personal opinion. I know people don't want to hear me talk about Karl Malone all day, especially with what I just said. I'm kind of siding with Karl Malone being at All-Star Weekend. I'm sorry if I threw you for a curveball there, if I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, but that's just my opinion. So let's talk ball, though. I think the format, by the way, of the All-Star Game and All-Star Weekend has gone through so many changes, and it should continue to change to keep up with those changes. For example, the scoring change that's in effect now during the All-Star Game, I feel is a great thing, but it could change. It should go back to normal, like what I said on the podcast episode, about it, and I believe it has. Actually, Adam Silver actually has changed the All-Star Weekend format. From what I've heard, the 2024 NBA All-Star Weekend, which is going to be in Indiana, by the way, is going to look different. It's going to be different. Also the jersey debate is always a debate. It would be a cool thing, and this is just an idea, but if the jerseys went back to the players, wearing their respective NBA jerseys, from their teams, and not the East and West All-Star jerseys, which are great also, by the way, but it just, again, me being me as an old school person, if you were in my heyday watching basketball back in the 90s, of course you remember, the NBA jersey days when they would wear the NBA jerseys during All-Star Weekend. So that would be a cool idea. I'm hearing a lot about some changes, though, again, to take effect at All-Star Weekend that Adam Silver wants to make happen. And I like what I am hearing, as I said. I talked about this on the podcast and changes I want to see, so that's all I'll say for now. Now, as for, All-Star Weekend, what I'm going to talk about And let's just jump right to it. And with that being said, if you get the reference, white men can jump. Let's jump right to him. Mac McClung and his performance during the dunk contest. Wow, is all I can say. White men can jump. I'm sorry, by the way. I had to say that here while I'm in front of the camera. I said that on the podcast, of course. I tweeted that when it happened. When Mac McClung won the dunk contest, that reference was just waiting. By the way, the dunk contest was awesome. Was saved. Because of Mac McClung. It would have been trash if it wasn't for him. Like I said, I like the participants though. My favorite portion this past year, with that said, was the 3-point contest. I liked how Dame Time showed out and won. I liked how Tyrese Halliburton almost won the 3-point contest. But overall, All-Star Weekend was interesting as it is every year. Like I said, the Karl Malone stuff is still something very interesting to me, by the way, and that's why I was talking about it. But again, the All-Star, formatting is still a conversation. It was in Utah. I like the Utah Jazz theme. I just hope this upcoming event in 2024 is better and stuff also. Now, with that being said, okay, let's move on to this. So I talked about Super Bowl and All-Star Weekend, two of my favorite things. I love football and basketball, but you guys, my favorite sport and thing in the world actually is, you got it, the world of professional wrestling. I talked about a little wrestling on my podcast, actually a lot of wrestling, of course. That's right. My beloved wrestling was one of my podcast episodes that I dropped. I dropped an episode on wrestling. It was actually called, obviously, Wrestling Goes Hollywood. That's a play on, WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. From earlier this year in February, WrestleMania 39 was in Hollywood, which was a big, massive event, by the way. But yeah, so as the legend has it, you guys, I grew up watching wrestling. And yes, the one and only Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels was, and always will be my favorite wrestler of all time. Also my celebrity crush growing up. I hide no quarrels about my love for Shawn Michaels, and I can be seen. Obviously, you can go listen to that podcast episode, by the way, and which I'll get to. Even though I literally talked about Shawn Michaels for about 45 minutes on that podcast episode, so I won't get all the way into it here. So make sure you check that out though, my wrestling episode. A link to the episode is actually below, this video, of course, in the comments. So make sure you go listen to that. But like I said on the podcast episode, it all started with my great grandfather who loved wrestling. He loved watching it and boxing. As the legend has it, he would crouch down in front of the television and boom and ooh and ah and motion like the wrestlers, and body slam like the wrestlers. If you know the history of pro wrestling, it runs deep, and my family was one of those. They watched, they went to shows and all that, going back to the days of my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, all the way down, obviously, to me now. Who now is a 29, 30-year-old woman and journalist, dear God, still loves wrestling. And of course, I do, because I grew up watching Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Triple H, Stone Cold, The Rock, and all the others, especially as we were in the illustrious Attitude Era. I'm an Attitude Era kid, I am an Attitude Era baby, you guys, indeed, So watching Matt and Jeff Hardy, fly off ladders, is and was, literally, the coolest thing ever. And then reenacting all the moves, in my people's living room, yes, I was one of those. My childhood was filled with a lot of wrestling. And yes, it was filled with a lot of Shawn Michaels. Now, shout out to the Heartbreak Kid, of course, the one and only Shawn Michaels. As I explained on the podcast, I had the biggest obsession with Shawn Michaels growing up, you guys. I'm telling you, of course started with the ladder match and heart tights and the mullet, and the Mickey Mouse glasses and Super Kid in the barbershop window and Marty Jannetty. But then it just spiraled into an all-out obsession. I had all the HBK action figures and watched him on absolutely everything, and sometimes on things besides wrestling, you guys. I still have a VHS tape recording of Shawn Michaels when he was on Pictionary and Pacific Blue, which you guys can find on YouTube, by the way. I like to watch those in my free time. But my love for Shawn Michaels and his wrestling runs deep. Like I said, I grew up watching wrestling, and thank God I did. I was one of those kids growing up. I say this respectfully. I chose Shawn Michaels over the Hitman Bret Hart. I chose Heartbreaking Tights over the Glasses Kids. I have to say it here, on the podcast. You will hear here first, and you'll always hear. I think HBK is the GOAT. AKA the greatest of all time and my all-time favorite pro wrestler. He thinks he's cute. He knows he's sexy. Should I even get into the theme song? He's saying his own interest music. which is so legendary, especially when the pyro used to go off and the pose that he did. Shawn Michaels is the GOAT, you guys. He who invented, the ladder match, the Hell in a Cell match, and a lot of matches for that matter. The Iron Man match with Bret Hart, of course, the Hell in a Cell with The Undertaker in 1997. The Elimination Chamber match, just in terms of, Born Again Christian 2000s era Shawn Michaels side of the spectrum. And for my cool kids in the room, of course, going back to old school HBK, he won the Royal Rumble twice back to back. Those are some legendary moments in wrestling history that Shawn Michaels obviously not only was a part of, but he invented and that he innovated and helped kick things off a little bit. He kicked off the greatest singles career in wrestling history in one of the most pivotal moments and heel turns also in wrestling history. I mean, he literally kicked it off, right? When he super kicked his own tag team partner, Marty Jannetty, of course, through the barbershop window. Of course, I'm speaking of the barbershop window moment here for my cool kids in the room. All of those matches and moments now have evolved and involved a lot of wrestlers, a lot of greats at this point, but back in the day, OG Shawn Michaels, revolutionized wrestling, especially during the Monday Night Wars. I'm no real true expert, but I know Shawn Michaels during the Monday Night Wars and what he gave to wrestling, as a top guy during his prime was something serious, And then, of course, in the 2000s, Shawn Michaels' comeback happened, which I was which I was sitting right in front of my television watching, of course. And the Heartbreak Kid continued to revolutionize wrestling and reinvent himself, as the wrestling legend that he is, which I am forever grateful for, that I was able to sit here, and witness. Watching Shawn Michaels wrestle growing up was such an experience. And again, I say that with all the love, obsession, and also respect and admiration for Shawn Michaels in the world. I like that at the end of the day, we get to, decide between, 90s Shawn Michaels and 2000 Shawn Michaels, which is the point. My favorite wrestler has two different eras of himself, and I will always vouch for Shawn Michaels, being the absolute GOAT, for that reason, that makes Shawn Michaels the GOAT. He was already the GOAT in his prime and how he transformed the Monday Night Wars, as I was just talking about, obviously. But the fact that he was able also to come back, from his back injury that he suffered, and basically, during an important event, obviously known as WrestleMania 14, where Shawn Michaels did injure his back, by the way, which sidelined him for 4 years, and be cemented then, on the wrestling Mount Rushmore, where he belongs, is truly incredible. HBK's face, by the way, is definitely on my Mount Rushmore of wrestling. But the impact Shawn Michaels has on wrestling goes without saying, from his matches and gimmick and the different eras. The impact HBK had on me as a little girl, watching wrestling goes without saying. As the little girls, all little girls watching wrestling growing up know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying? Shawn Michaels is a huge part of my wrestling story, obviously. Now, speaking of Shawn Michaels, you can't mention him without mentioning, Mr. Triple H, obviously, who runs WWE now and NXT. I can't think of two better wrestling legends to be running backstage, for WWE than like, basically the Clique, DX, which obviously Shawn Michaels is known for. He's known for, running and taking over things with his Clique. So, but WWE programming now is so interesting, like it's always been. It's WWE, a worldwide wrestling company, and it's what they're expected to do, from the days of Hogan and Andre the Giant, Macho Man, and the Ultimate Warrior up to now. Wrestling and WWE and Vince McMahon have all truly started a revolution. As a wrestling fan, I was here for when they changed, by the way, from WWF to WWE, the Monday Night War with WCW, the Attitude Era, the PG era, and of course now, the NXT era, which Shawn Michaels the GOAT runs, of course. And with that said, WWE is always changing to the fans and audience's graces. And I know we always say that, and wrestling fans like to have so many, opinions. But I mean, WWE is now interesting. It really has changed, over the years and evolved for this new world we live in. I like how we stream wrestling now on Peacock, for example, opposed to having to buy, pay-per-views on cable television. All of the pay-per-views and other special shows do a really good job on Peacock. I love the WWE Network, which was an experiment, when that happened. And truly a pleasure for me. So, obviously, so I can watch all the Shawn Michaels moments and matches and clips for no real good reason at all. But WWE should bring back the network, should bring the network back, by the way, for all true wrestling fans. But what they've been able to do with Peacock is great. No more paying for pay-per-view via the pay-per-view service on cable, but it still has that old school feel to it. I still like waiting for the show to come on Peacock. And of course now, the pre-shows that they do, WWE still puts together a great pre-show rivalry package also, when they go over the feuds and flashback for every match. The pay-per-views themselves are great. I love the NXT brand and shows, which feature so many rising stars in the wrestling business. And it's really, great as a program. And of course, WWE still has their classic pay-per-views with the mixed feeling of fresh and vintage, such as Money in the Bank, the Great American Bash, No Mercy, and all the big ones like the Royal Rumble, of course, and WrestleMania. Like I said, WWE is in a great place, and wrestling is still, so cool to me, of course, and so very much so real to me. I talked about all this on my full podcast episode, which again, you guys should go listen to after this, and also hear about my dear God, Shawn Michaels' loving childhood and obsession with the Heartbreak Kid growing up. But last but not least, I want to just mention AEW. WWE is still at the top of their game, so that's why I don't understand why another wrestling company like AEW exists and is trying to take the top spot. No, I'm kidding when I say that. But I just want to say, speaking of AEW, it's a thing where, I actually do love and respect AEW. Although there is a conversation to be had, I think, about its competition to WWE, and especially, I think, in the context of history and WCW. I mean, today we've just accepted any amount of fun and watching grown men, body slam each other that we can handle in our veins, and AEW provides that. We're just open to anything because it's sports and entertainment. I mean, it's wrestling, it's pro wrestling, which everyone loves, of course, and which has evolved and which is a deep sport for people. But all my real wrestling fans know we're going to compare and chop down history like a tree. And I think we should talk about AEW like we did WCW. And I'm not trying to, again, rain on anyone's parade type of situation either. And that's not to take away from the program or the pure love for pro wrestling that people have. That's what I'm trying to say here, So with that being said, I'm complimenting AEW actually, and they deserve to be complimented a lot. I believe they deserve that comparison to WCW in the old school days of wrestling at this point. I mean, who would we be if we didn't bring up the Monday Night Wars, with the rise of AEW, in competition with WAB. The way they built a wrestling promotion, and it's more than a promotion. It's an entire televised wrestling program, with so many stars, past and present. And national live pay-per-views, like WB, they seem to have followed the recipe, so I'm just saying, they're following a recipe, and it's, and it's a recipe for success so far. So I'm actually complimenting AEW, like very much so like WCW back in the day for my cool kids in the room. I talked about this, by the way, on the full podcast episode. I've had some time to think about it. One thing I want to add is the difference between AEW and WCW, though, is that AEW hasn't or isn't openly, stating their competition with WB. Now, that is a good thing. And that's what I mean by, on the flip side of that, of course, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade by having by living in the nostalgia, obviously, too, and having a conversation about WCW where it doesn't belong. But so that's the thing. AEW was, they're good at actually not openly stating their competition to WB. That was WCW's downfall also. I meant to mention that on my podcast episode, the wrestling one where I'm talking about the Monday Night Wars, and I'm describing, at least from my perspective, why WCW, succeeded at times, of course, and why they, also failed at times. They openly spoke about their competition to WWE, and Eric Bischoff openly threw shots at Vince McMahon. I mean, that wasn't so smart in retrospect. I think AEW is just a bright new wrestling show with promise, and they're trying to keep it that way. But again, when WCW hit the scene, Eric Bischoff, he was, the snarky boss. He was throwing shots at WWE, which I didn't think was smart then, and that's what drove, obviously, Triple H, DX to invade WCW Nitro. That big old tank moment, obviously, in wrestling history. That's what started that whole ordeal. WCW basically, they could have almost quietly, sneakily, snuck their way into success a little bit. They should have kept it a little bit more quieter. But anyway, I think AEW is just a bright new wrestling show with promise, and they're trying to keep it that way, like I said, but I like the competition, like I said, just being a wrestling kid growing up and remembering the Monday Night Wars, between WB and WCW. With all of that being said, AEW should just keep that in mind also. Like, they may be like the others, if they get too ahead, they should just be aware of that. There's been a lot of wrestling promotions to pose a threat to the corporation, the house that WB built, even WCW with even Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, even Hulk Hogan even reinvented himself. Shout out to Hulk Hogan, by the way, one of the greatest. With Hollywood Hogan at the helm of it, and the NWO coming out of it, the New World Order coming out of it, couldn't stand the rain, basically, So I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade, but again, even WCW with Hollywood Hogan and NWO, they still failed. But who knows? AEW could come out standing if they use their own umbrella, and they certainly have their own lane. So I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade. I'm not trying to be an obstacle here. That's the other thing. They do have, well put together pay-per-views and shows. I do want to compliment AEW again on their setup. There's nothing wrong with two wrestling programs, especially for hardcore pure wrestling fans. So I'm just saying, and talking about WCW, for a little lighthearted fun, to be honest. I'm a skeptic, or was, about AEW, when they first, hit the scene. I didn't hop on the AEW. With all of that being said, I didn't hop on the AEW bandwagon as soon as it happened because, I'm a WWE girl through and through. I'm a huge WWE fan. I grew up on WWE, of course. I'll die on that Attitude Era, WWF wrestling heel. It's just the facts. Shout out to AEW, though. I'm finally in the midst of watching full episodes now, and I like their pay-per-views, like AEW Dynamite and Collision, and I also like, the AEW video game that came out, by the way. I really do love the video game. This era, and back to the business of things, this era and world we live in is making room for other shows and innovators like Tony Khan, so I see you, AEW, I so shout out to AEW, and of course, the corporation's boss, the Tony Khan, of course, who runs AEW. They're doing a fantastic job just as a pure wrestling fan. And again, they're following the recipe. I'm seeing all the stars that WB has. I'm seeing all the stars on AEW. Now, before I end, of course, my talk on the wrestling side of things, I just want to say, last but not least, if you've been watching wrestling lately, you would know, of course, that CM Punk returned recently at Survivor Series, which has been big, of course, wrestling news. And shout out to CM Punk. He's one of my favorite wrestlers just in terms of, today's wrestling. I'm talking about AEW and NXT and WWE and all of that good stuff and all of the new age wrestlers. Well, CM Punk is certainly one of my favorite wrestlers. And also Randy Orton, too, made his return to wrestling also. Randy Orton and his returns are always, good television, at least in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of the Viper, Randy Orton, and a huge fan also of CM Punk. So I'm just, I'm excited for wrestling. CM Punk is one of my favorite wrestlers, and I can't wait to see him in some feuds. And also, obviously, it's December now, and WrestleMania 40, will be, is right around the corner, which, of course, I was talking about, obviously, the NFL stuff. I kicked off this podcast stuff with NFL talk. On the wrestling side of things, the wrestling will be, alongside the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia for WrestleMania 40. WrestleMania 40 will be in Philadelphia in 2024. So I can't wait for WrestleMania 40. By the way, I hope I'm able. Actually, I'm gonna try to go. That's my big secret, you guys. I'm gonna try to go. So now you guys, drum roll, please. I need a drum roll, of course. Wrestling, is my real true love, and I had to take a minute, obviously, to talk about it. But back to the NBA, though, which was full of excitement and thrills this past season, as you all know if you watch. The main thrill, of course, was the Denver Nuggets winning the NBA championship. Congratulations, to the Denver Nuggets, and of course Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. Listen, the Nuggets are living their best life. They're on top of that hill, the highest mountain in Denver that you can think of, and they're not coming off of it. I like to call it the Denver Nuggets utopia. They're in complete bliss, and it was a complete joy to watch the Nuggets, as a basketball fan and sports writer also, when sports journalists win their first championship. The Nuggets didn't do this even in the days of Carmelo Anthony, which was a time for the Nuggets franchise, what they're doing now. So these days are reminding me of those days, those mellow days, and like Carmelo Anthony, shout out to Carmelo Anthony, by the way, his play with the Denver Nuggets was smooth, was quite mellow, which, again, and Nikola Jokic, bears the number 15, also like the great Carmelo Anthony. So, I don't like to make, frivolous comparisons. But so with that being said too, the Nuggets now though and what they are doing is so good for the NBA. They are a franchise deserving of this moment, and Nikola Jokic is such a great player as we all know. The Joker they call him. The Joker is to me though, that's his nickname, but he's really no joke. The Joker and his individual stats are already something. But then too to win a championship, puts the icing on the cake. And of course, he's already a two-time MVP, and then to top again, winning the championship does put the icing on the cake. That proves your superiority over the entire league in the history of the NBA. Winning a championship and the significance that holds. More than individual stats sometimes. Obviously means a lot. And then to have a point guard too in Jamal Murray, who's so humble and learning and growing and so very talented and all those things. It's just cool to see. It's just great to see. I'm a Nuggets fan, you guys. The Nuggets remind me of those old, the old school teams, the old school Jazz with Malone and Stockton, John Stockton, of course. John Stockton is one of my absolute favorite NBA point guards and NBA players in NBA history, or the Spurs, the old school Spurs, Tony Parker and Tim Duncan, or the Lakers even, of course, Shaq and Kobe, or even the Celtics, Nikola Jokic, and not just the Bill Russell Celtics, but also too the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Rajon Rondo Celtics. I said all this on the podcast, but it really is something to watch and analyze. I'm not just making comparisons here. Also, yeah, and speaking of the Celtics, I want to obviously not forget the name Larry Bird, the Larry Bird Celtics. So not just those Celtics. But yes, this really shows, again, I'm not just making comparisons here. So all of this really just shows, Nikola Jokic's and the Nuggets basketball, superiority. The championship was won for the real ones. Their championship was won for the real ones. We are indeed in the age of the Joker, and we're, again, I think we're all living in the Nuggets world, as they say, and it's the Nuggets world, and we're all just living in it, basically. With that said, who else is for the real ones? The Nuggets opponent this past season, the Miami Heat. Heat Nation will remind you of this, so I don't have to tell you. But yes, Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat are for the real ones. They're for real. Even though the Butler couldn't do it and win it all, as I would explained in my podcast, which was heartbreaking, of course. But I wrote an article, obviously, for Fansided, by the way, about Jimmy Butler's rise to fame and persistence, which we've seen time and time again. I was rooting for the Heat a little in the Denver Nuggets series, especially after the series against the Bucks and Celtics. I mean, the Heat barely made the playoffs this year and beat, both the Bucks, and beat both the Bucks and Celtics in a rather controversial and disastrous way. With that being said, we all remember that Bucks and Heat series, which was absolutely disastrous, so I won't get into it. And then what Jimmy did to the Celtics too, though, is unfathomable. What the Butler did to the Celtics is unforgivable. They sent Derek White packing, basically. They didn't care about that game 6 where he basically tried to come back and score that game winner. He basically sent Derek White home. He made the C's basically trade Marcus Smart, even made them give Jaylen Brown a lofty contract, which may be sending a message, for this season, obviously. But never mind all that. We all know the Heat is still on, though, in Miami. Miami is still on the loose in the East, you guys, and they will be looking to at least make some sparks fly next season, this season, of course. It is telling, however, how they couldn't beat the Nuggets, so I did just want to say it is still telling, the Heat might need to make some adjustments this off season, or of course this season, at the trade deadline or what have you, not as many adjustments as the Bucks and the Celtics, and what they've made. I don't know how Giannis and Jason Tatum feel about that, by the way, me saying that, but they're going to have to come harder than that this season, obviously, to beat the Miami Heat. I do want to shout out, though, my hometown Milwaukee Bucks. They do seem to be, getting that message. However, they have Damian Lillard now, and they may have just obviously come harder. The Milwaukee Bucks certainly haven't ignored the criticism, and that shows in their acquisition of Mr. Dame Time himself, Damian Lillard. Now, onto some fun. The Kings and Warriors series was the complete opposite of the Heat and Celtics and Bucks and in the Heat and Bucks series. Wow, is all that I can say after that Kings and Warriors series, right? If we all remember the NBA playoffs this past, earlier back in June. When you say excitement, I mean excitement. You had the Kings and De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, going up against a vintage, Steph Curry and his Warriors. It was truly, it was an underdog versus, the veterans matchup in every way imaginable. But, of course, as usual, the veteran Warriors came out on top. The veteran team came out on top. With that said, though, seriously, this was a battle in every way, in a really unique series. The East usually is a dogfight. With that being said, but this series was a dogfight in the West. The Kings and Warriors went all the way to Game 7, and not many Warriors fans expected that, and that was the best part for me, by the way. The best part was the fact that the Kings were one of the top teams in the West this year. They even had a higher seeding than the Warriors even. They were the number 3 seed. We heard it all season last year. The Kings' success was a pleasure, was a true pleasure to witness. Again, we heard it all season last season. The Kings haven't been, talked about since Shaq, disvalid Divac on that bus. So that was truly the best part. The Kings' success, after so many years was truly the best part. So, they rode that wave all the way to the playoffs and took, Mr. Chef Curry to a Game 7. So shout out to De'Aaron Fox on that. He took, Steph Curry to a Game 7 all the way down to the wire. Like I tweeted before, and I tweeted this, De'Aaron Fox is a fox, and we all know Steph Curry, came in as a wolf. So this was an absolutely great battle. Steph came in as a wolf in the game, but De'Aaron Fox, you guys, is indeed a fox. With all of that said, I want to see the Kings back in the playoffs with that same hype, and personally, I would like to see them win it all. With their future, of course, with young guys still very much so young, like De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. I would love to see and Malik Monk, of course. I would love to see the Kings back in the playoffs and also go all the way to the finals, perhaps. Now, speaking of the West and teams in the West and all that, and I'm going downhill actually a little bit, even though I'm talking about, yes, you guys guessed it, the Phoenix Suns. Now, what I mean by going downhill is because, even though I'm talking about the Phoenix Suns, I'm going to get to KD, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal on the upside of the Suns, the bright side of things, if you get my reference. But the Suns' playoff appearance wasn't too hot. I can't call it a run. It was an appearance, though. Now, I thought the Suns were going all the way, but they fell to the Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals in that disastrous series, if you guys will recall. They're the Nuggets. They were meant to win, obviously win it all. But I mean disastrous. When I say disastrous, it was horrid. The series against the Nuggets that the Suns played, that I'm talking about here, could have been better, if they didn't win it. That whole blowout thing that happened and how they were missing players, which became their lackluster excuse for a lackluster performance. I'll talk more about the Suns and have more of a reason to, obviously now with them, with Bradley Beal in the mix now, along with KD and Devin Booker. They already had KD, but then of course you guys know they went ahead and acquired Bradley Beal. I was just talking about the Milwaukee Bucks and their acquisition of Damian Lillard, but now the Suns have Bradley Beal. But I just wanted to touch on how silly their playoff performance was, to me. Again, that's not to knock the whole Big Three now in Phoenix, and I'm getting to that. But I'm talking about the playoff series now against the Nuggets, back in the playoffs. You would think after the KD trade, the trade for Kevin Durant, they would have fared off a little better, but this is what I love about the NBA. Anything can happen. Now, with that being said, speaking of Mr. Kevin Durant, let's talk about my NBA season recap. That was one of my my podcast episodes as well. I did an episode where I did basically a season wrap up from last season. So there are some things from last season where we're at the start of the new NBA season. Just speaking of highlights and moments and all that. Now, firstly, the horrible playoffs, for the Phoenix Suns against the Nuggets, doesn't mean the KD trade isn't meaningful still. The KD trade is still important, obviously, especially in the new season now, as the Suns obviously have gained Bradley Beal along with to help KD now, and KD has been on fire, in the month of February. It's actually, quite frankly, it's December now, almost December. Like I said, in a couple of minutes it'll be December, but or it's December 1st actually, but in the month of February, KD was on fire. I believe he's averaging, or was averaging, 30 points per game, and that has been in the absence of Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, due to injury woes. Scary hours, you guys. So the KD trade was the biggest news of last season. Again, in case you have been living under a rock or something, it happened toward the end of last season. When the news broke, I was sitting at home and tweeting, of course, and tweeting about basketball, obviously. But to be quite honest, I was still like everyone else. really trying to figure out, on the analysis and serious side of things, I wasn't just tweeting. I was trying to figure out where KD was headed. I was trying to figure out where KD was going. If he was going to stay in Brooklyn or go elsewhere, and make another blockbuster move. That's what made it better, because like the big trades, it came out of nowhere. With the big superstars, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Of course, when the move to Brooklyn was news when that happened. And Kyrie Irving, had a lot to do with KD's move to Brooklyn. Of course, Kyrie had a lot to do with KD going to Phoenix. And also in the sense that that the Kyrie trade to the Mavericks is spearheaded blockbuster trades for Brooklyn. I guess when Kyrie decided to leave, we knew obviously that was the end of it. We know that KD is going somewhere also, and then eventually James Harden went to the 76ers. Kyrie and KD are good buddies, and both made their moves from Brooklyn, of course. Now, with that said, it was time for them to leave Brooklyn, by the way, the Nets. The Kyrie trade to the Mavs was so misunderstood to me at first, but I understand it now. I get it. It's a unique opportunity for Kyrie Irving, for a player like Kyrie, and a place for Kyrie. The Mavs are a great organization with promising talent, and Luka Doncic, who Kyrie wants to play with, obviously. Kyrie likes playing with his fellow stars. I just wanted to touch on the Kyrie trade along with KD. But that brings me to the man, known as KD, full name Kevin Durant, of course. The KD trade to Phoenix, was made much more sense than Kyrie to the Mavs to me. And it's really put the icing on the cake, on blockbuster trades, on the blockbuster news, of both of their trades. KD is known for being creative and smart, and so making this move to an organization like the Phoenix Suns, especially where they are right now, was creative and smart. Now also, I don't know if the Suns recruited KD or Devin Booker, or how Devin Booker did like Kyrie or Devin Booker like Kyrie did for the Nets, but it made sense. The Suns certainly reaped the benefits though of their KD trade, as they did make the playoffs at least. Again, I was talking earlier about the KD trade and the Suns playoff series against the Denver Nuggets, and how it wasn't what I was expecting. But there are reasons for that, which I did explain on the podcast episode, actually, on the actual podcast audio episode. My favorite part, though, of the trade is that it kind of wasn't as blockbuster or outspoken as it put on. It was kind of quiet, calm, cool, and collected. Very much so like Kevin Durant's game, very much so like his basketball. They didn't make a big fuss until it was announced. And of course, it being Kevin Durant, once it was announced, of course, once Woj put it on, tweeted it out, the Kevin Durant news, we all flipped. But KD remained quiet and cool, though. There certainly wasn't any big chaos or controversies, like in Brooklyn. KD was just implemented, kind of smoothly into the Suns lineup and embraced by the Suns organization. With that said, I wish KD nothing but the best in Phoenix, in spite of their lackluster performance, in the playoffs. He surely will be successful in the trio of him and Booker and Beal and whoever else the Suns want to add. We'll truly be successful. Obviously, I'm looking forward to the playoffs, by the way, this year, because that's just something. Now I've talked about all of this. My next thing now, I've talked about all of this on my NBA podcast episodes that I dropped. But another thing that happened, this past season, of course, involved a lot of Draymond Green. A lot of things that happened this past season involved Draymond Green. And of course, excuse me, Dylan Brooks. And shout out to Draymond Green, since I'm doing my podcast. Actually, Draymond Green has a podcast himself that everyone, of course, likes to listen to and get his perspective. So I want to talk about Draymond Green, on my podcast now. Draymond Green is a rather, dynamic, outspoken power forward for the Warriors, and he says and does a lot of things, of course. I said I was going to talk about Dylan Brooks, and of course the Memphis Grizzlies had a season this past season, but I'll get to that. Before Dylan Brooks, though, I do want to talk about Domantas Sabonis as well as Jordan Poole. I just, again, I talked about this all on the podcast episode, but I just want to reiterate in front of the camera here, of course, and just talk more about Draymond Green, just because, those were some interesting moments. Draymond Green kicked a person and punched a teammate all in the same season. I mean, but I have something to say, so I have something to say about this type of stuff. I have something to say, especially about the Sabonis thing. Jordan Poole, that was nothing. You say something to me, I say something to you. You hit me, I hit you back. It went viral, and both Draymond Green and Jordan Poole, I think, wanted the reaction. I think, that's up obviously to the Warriors organization to handle it, and Poole has gone to the Warriors, to the Wizards now, so that's not a problem anymore. But with Sabonis, though, of course, with that, with me just speaking about, the Kings and Warriors series too, with that in mind, the Kings and Warriors, very exciting and wild and unpredictable NBA playoffs series from last season. When Draymond Green stepped on Domantas Sabonis, everyone was 100% against Draymond. I disagree. I'm 100% against violence of any kind, and I understand where the Domantas Sabonis supporters are coming from. But if you look at the full play, Exhibit A, Sabonis grabs Draymond's legs, and that's what started the kick, first of all. I don't know why we started, started at the point where Draymond steps on Sabonis. In the video, when we were shown the replay over 100, times, and can clearly see where it all started. Furthermore, how Draymond was punished, and without any reparations, basically. I mean, come on, I get it. Sabonis and the Kings had a miracle season. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. The refs may have shown some favoritism for that reason. You know how it goes. And again, I'm not an NBA athlete, and neither am I an NBA ref, so I won't get fined. I won't get fined for saying what I just said, obviously. So you know how all this goes, though. The bigger the star, the more calls you are awarded. That's just my take on it. It could be privilege in that aspect. Domantas Sabonis has been playing fantastic, or he was playing fantastic last season, and he's a great basketball player. He's the son, actually, of an NBA legend himself. But again, so yeah, by the way, if I were an NBA star right now, I would be fine, though, because I would have spoken out. With that being said, I would have spoken out against the refs, of course. But anyway, Dillon Brooks, I just want to say Dillon Brooks, if nothing else, Dillon Brooks is, to him, is the ultimate villain. And so it makes sense that he and Draymond Green butted heads at some point. When they did, by the way, I was on, Draymond's team, on this one also, just because of what he said about Dillon Brooks on his podcast. We all know what he said. I repeated it on my podcast, by the way. It was a line about you guys. It was the line where he said, the Grizzlies are looking to this idiot, are looking to this idiot to help them win a championship. I mean, I'm not one to gossip, but ouch, that was pretty harsh, but from Draymond Green, and to be honest, pretty funny also. So that's why I was on Draymond Green's side. I liked when he said that, by the way. That was pretty interesting. Of course, the other thing about Draymond Green that I should mention, just because I'm on the subject now, since the new season has begun now, is the Rudy Gobert controversy. Draymond is again in some stuff this season. I mean, good old Draymond Green, you guys. I mean, I want to touch on that. I do want to say my opinion may not sound like yours. I don't think Draymond Green should have been the only one suspended for choking Rudy Gobert either. In that altercation which happened, this in the beginning of this season, of course, in the new NBA 2023-2024 NBA season. For my cool kids in the room, the Warriors and Timberwolves were in a game and got into the altercation. The thing for me wasn't even the altercation itself. It was the time it took within the game for the game. And yes, then the altercation, the levels to it and how it escalated. We weren't even a minute even into the game, when this all started happening, like it was happening. And I'm thinking we're in the fourth quarter of a game 7 in a heated NBA finals or something, the way that they were beefing. But I looked down, and saw first quarter in 9 minutes, and I said, what, but so anyway, yeah, it was a time for me of the altercation, which I thought was pretty interesting. But anyway, I saw it all, and I don't think Draymond Green again should have been the only one suspended. Even though he jumped on Rudy Gobert like a bear. He put him in a straight up headlock, and like this was WWE or something. My reason being, though, of course, for not wanting Draymond Green, on a serious note, to have been the only one suspended, is that Rudy Gobert jumped in the business that wasn't his also. I mean, he straight out grabbed, Klay Thompson, to defend, Jaden McDaniels. He should have gotten suspended also. And Gobert is no stranger to this type of stuff also. NBA Twitter knows what I'm talking about. As for Klay Thompson and Jaden McDaniels, both should have gotten something, just for being there. Klay did grab his jersey, and Jaden, retaliated. You hit me, I hit you. I mean, they got thrown out of the game. They did both get ejected, obviously, when that happened. But I don't get why Draymond Green was the only one suspended in this aspect either. I mean, I'd like to see the papers on this one from the Warriors and Timberwolves and NBA refs game, and and how they made that decision. But that's just me. As a basketball fan, as a fan watching basketball. Hey, I'm not an NBA player or an NBA ref again. Now, I started by mentioning Dillon Brooks, along with Draymond Green. I'm kind of done with Dillon Brooks. He no longer plays for the Grizzlies anyway, and as he is now being a villain for the Houston Rockets. The Grizzlies will likely then, with that being said, though, will likely still be in the headline zone without Dillon Brooks. And that's obviously, of course, I just want to touch on this. That's obviously, because of the Ja Morant situation. The man in Memphis, the man in the mirror now. I do want to talk about Mr. Ja Morant. I do want to talk about Ja Morant. I honestly said it all, on my actual NBA season, recap podcast episode, but I want to just say a few more things, something on, a few more things on Ja Morant, and, while we're here. I meant every word of what I said about Ja Morant, and I do want to add, in the spirit of the conversation of about athletes and when they do, bad things, we have to look at it, as a learning lesson. I hope Ja Morant is using this, using his suspension, and his time off rather, as a learning lesson. I mean, I hope that Ja Morant is again using suspension, to, his time off to learn and to be better. Of course that's, none of our business. And what I mean by that is that, we do have to allow Ja Morant the time and the space to clear his head and really figure things out. Again, we're obviously here also to watch Ja Morant play basketball, and we're all basketball fans and can't wait for him to get back on the floor. That's true also. We'll all be jumping and screaming, when Ja Morant makes his return, when he returns, which is in December, by the way, and that's not far off, obviously, as it is November 30th, actually, or actually it is, it actually is quite literally December 1st. So it was November, but so yes, December is, Ja Morant's return is right around the corner. So again, that's just it. It's all tricky. It was, it's a 25 game suspension, and he has plenty to think about. He has had plenty of time, between when this all started happening now and when we all know he wants to return back to the floor. I'm not sure if that is literally enough time for Morant to think about what he's done, but he has to do some thinking. He took his suspension and hasn't really been involved in much while serving it. So that's a good sign. It's a good thing that Ja Morant has kind of kept quiet since his suspension or during his suspension. I just hope he's I just hope he's using this time wisely. Like watching some basketball tape and listening to some productive podcast or something, like indulging in the good news. Sometimes it's a good thing to delete those, social media accounts, and it's just an impulse act. And it's not just an impulse act, for today's generation, or because I'm mad, my Instagram, model girlfriend broke up with me and didn't answer my DM. It's sometimes good to delete those social media accounts, for genuine stuff, the way that Mr. Morant, Ja Morant has, when he does kind of post on social media, or when he does vanish from social media, it's for a good reason. So you shouldn't beg for him to be tweeting, night and day, like, for example, when Ja Morant did, delete, when he vanished from social media, even after the incident happened, I don't think we should be, kind of, oh, where did Ja Morant go, and, make a big rumor mill out of it. He obviously is, taking this time to clear his head. He actually shouldn't be on Instagram or Twitter, with that being said. Now with that being said, then, I hope that Ja Morant has, the support of his father and family and support of positive friends, like everyone. I can't wait for Mr. Morant to make his return to basketball, which again is not that far off. And speaking of Ja Morant, of course, as you can see, I also have a Funko Pop of Ja Morant on my round table here. So yes, I'm a huge Ja Morant fan, still of his basketball, still, and I wish Ja Morant nothing but the best. All right, that was my season recap from last season, but of course the new season is upon us, and we're actually, about 5-6 weeks into the new season. Of course, I've already talked about some stuff, like the Draymond Green, Rudy Gobert thing, the Suns and Bradley Beal, the Bucks and Damian Lillard. I'll talk about the new season on a whole separate, podcast and roundtable discussion, by the way, some other things happening, of course, in the new NBA season. But I do want to point out, it has been exciting to say the least, and because of the aforementioned things, Damian Lillard in Milwaukee now, and together with Giannis has been quite something, and especially for a hometown Milwaukee girl like me. The Bucks actually played the Bulls tonight, and again, it will continue to be something. The Dame time, and the Damian Lillard and Giannis thing, Dame time and Greek Freak, which is, they actually have a nickname. They call Damian Lillard and Giannis in Milwaukee they call them freak time now, excuse me. They call them freak time. So, I'm sure as the season progresses, they will continue. Obviously, freak time will continue to be something. The pairing of Giannis and Damian Lillard is truly something for the NBA. The Bucks just completed, by the way, the biggest comeback of the season so far at 26 points, as they actually beat Damian Lillard's former team, the Portland Trailblazers. That's right. The Trailblazers, that was big news as well. The Trailblazers were up 26 points on the Bucks during a game. And the Bucks, however, though, they completed a comeback, after a 26-point deficit, and that was obviously the big news is that it was the largest comeback of the NBA season, this season so far. But moving on to other things, James Harden and the Clippers, has been big news. When that trade happened, and also how Harden has played was big news. When the trade happened, and also Harden's play with the Clippers is big news. An analyst for the Mavs sort of called out Harden in a viral video clip, of course, after the slow start. I retweeted it, you guys. By the way, I'm not going to lie. Hopefully Harden gets back on his feet though and makes the Clippers go viral for being primetime television and watchable basketball, as what I believe obviously is his point in being, in Los Angeles, and being with the Clippers, the other LA team, of course. With that being said, other NBA news, Victor Wembanyama, the unicorn himself, the true unicorn, made his debut in NBA headlines as well. But the Spurs also have had a slow start and are still adjusting with their new franchise player, with their #1 draft pick. So that's been big news this season. Victor Wembanyama's debut, of course, his solo play on the floor, and our excitement over him, over the amazement that he is, but also the Spurs as a unit, have been big news this season, and unfortunately their slow start. Jeremy Sohan wants to play point guard. Speaking of the Clippers, star Kawhi Leonard was booed during a game, actually, during a game versus the Spurs when the Clippers were playing the Spurs. They were actually in San Antonio, and of course San Antonio, the fans, they booed Kawhi Leonard, and of course there is absolutely no reason to boo Kawhi Leonard, but they booed Kawhi Leonard, of course, and we all know why, because he no longer, a player like him, left the Spurs, the good old San Antonio Spurs. But I thought too, and that was in a clip that went viral, and Greg Popovich actually had to hop on the microphone and tell the crowd to shut up and not to boo during a game. And basically that's not, that doesn't represent the Spurs culture and who they are. But I kind of actually do think though, and with that being said, I actually think that game, by the way, when the Spurs fans booed Kawhi Leonard at the free throw line, I actually thought that was sort of a sign of respect. Because, it's Kawhi Leonard, Quiet Leonard, aka Quiet Leonard. He was great with San Antonio. The fact that, the Spurs fans, this wasn't even a Raptors game. And Kawhi Leonard helped the Raptors win a championship. But the Spurs though, the fact that they still remember Kawhi Leonard and what he gave to the Spurs, during, basically remembered his time with the Spurs, is what I found impressive, about the fact that they booed Kawhi Leonard. But either way, Spurs basketball, with that being said, is interesting and always interesting. And it is interesting this season, obviously, in spite of, obviously, their slow start, though. Now, with that being said, the NBA has been action-packed, since the new season started. Again, the Knicks are taking care of business. And I enjoy watching Knicks basketball. Speaking of the Knicks, they completed a comeback also, a large comeback also this season. And it was actually against the Miami Heat, their rival. The Knicks completed a 21-point comeback against the Miami Heat. But I do want to touch on also, the Timberwolves. Anthony Edwards primarily are absolutely dominating the league. I mean, they are a great young squad, very much so exciting in the West, like the Sacramento Kings. And Anthony Edwards is an extremely talented basketball player. I mean, a great start for the T-Wolves in the 2023-2024 NBA season. They'll be back in the playoffs, certainly for sure. The Suns with KD and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal don't show any signs of trouble or slowing down either. I mean, they are fun every night. I mean, that game winner that Devin Booker hit the other night was great. I mean, that fadeaway jumper, you guys, that was absolutely amazing stuff. Now on to some fun stuff. Speaking of Devin Booker, NBA 2K23 was big news this past season. NBA 2K24 is out now, of course. The Phoenix Suns had a polite season, this past season, though. Speaking of Devin Booker, with Devin Booker actually graced the cover of the NBA 2K23 video game for all my cool kids in the room who play video games and play NBA 2K, like I do, who sit in this black couch and sit down here on their, in their basement carpet and play video games. But the standard edition, Devin Booker did grace the standard edition of NBA 2K23 2K23. Of course, the GOAT, Michael Jordan, none other than Michael Jordan was on the cover of NBA 2K23. But, but D-Book's buddy, too, KD has been on the cover of NBA 2K before also. Of course, that was NBA 2K15, with the Spike Lee led My Career Story, one of the best 2Ks in my personal opinion. The story of Freak, like in my cousin Brandon's opinion, it was, the story, the Spike Lee led My Career Story was very dramatic, was too dramatic, but the story of Freak gets me, frequency also, as you can tell, I play a lot of NBA 2K, 2K is a perfect video game. Now, I have a secret, by the way, speaking of NBA 2K, just on some video game news. I didn't used to like NBA 2K, by the way. I was an NBA Live girl growing up. That's another thing. My cousin Brandon was an NBA 2K person, but I was an NBA Live person growing up. But that's later. I'll explain that in depth, on a 2K, video games podcast. But I just want to touch on video games here. Again, I like how Devin Booker was chosen for the cover, though, of NBA 2K23, considering what the Suns are doing these days. Perfect decision by NBA 2K. A very classy decision. But with that said, MJ did indeed cover the Legend Edition, Michael Jordan, with two different covers. I bought the actual Michael Jordan edition as a side note. I like the Jordan picture, by the way, on the Michael Jordan edition of NBA 2K23, the two Michael Jordan covers. I like the Jordan picture more than the jersey one. With that said, I'm still finishing, by the way, this is my other secret, I'm still finishing the Jordan challenges on NBA 2K23. And I mean, I've been playing NBA 2K24 like crazy. I mean, I absolutely love NBA 2K24. But so yes, with that being said, I know, but I really am going to finish, though. I am still finishing up the Jordan challenges on 2K23. I honestly play them, actually what's taking me so long is the fact that I honestly play them over again because they're so fun to play, and of course difficult to beat at times because it's Jordan. And I play on Hall of Fame mode, you guys. But that's what I liked about NBA 2K23, the Jordan aspect and challenges and the gameplay. It was certainly better than NBA 2K22. And I liked NBA 2K22 as a side note. I wasn't really that harsh on it. The gameplay, though, of 2K23 was by far so superior and perfect. Perfect really. I mean, with more minor things I can think of, with the exception of minor things that I can think of every year, minor criticism like every year with 2K, but yes, 2K23 was great. But like I said, that brings me to it. NBA 2K24 is out now. I've been playing that nonstop, since September. That's what's special about 2K and 2K24. It is a step above to NBA 2K23. NBA 2K24 is, which is hard for me to say, honestly, but it really is. The city and the new thing with the affiliations, Elite and the Rise affiliations. I'm a part of Team Rise, by the way. As a side note, that's on the PS5, that is. I'm actually Team Elite on the Xbox. That's my other thing, you guys. I gave in. I got an Xbox Series S, you guys. But that's a story for another day. NBA 2K24, though, is truly something. The gameplay, most importantly, everything is everything is enhanced. Especially the two most important things like the dribbling and the shooting. I shoot without my shot meter now. Without pulling my hair out, basically. And the arcade and look, feel in the rec center, I just love it. It has a cartoonish animated animated television series, feel to it. So I just love it. Last but not least, the builder system, brilliant. I mean, of course, the builder system of NBA 2K for my 2K players out there is big news, and my NBA fans is big news every year. But the builder system is brilliant. Listen, I'll talk more about it on a separate podcast episode. Of course, as I mentioned, I'll do a separate podcast episode on NBA 2K and NBA 2K24. Of course, NBA 2K24 is what I'll be doing. All holiday season long. I'll just basically be staying, enjoying the snow, and staying in, cuddled up with the blanket and in front of my big screen television and playing NBA 2K. Now, excuse me, while we're on the subject of video games, let's talk more video games and scary video games, actually. I want to get into my scary movies podcast stuff, last but not least, to wrap up my roundtable discussion. But I talked about video games on it also. This is also my excuse, obviously, or time to tell, GTA 6 to hurry up, right? Firstly, I want to give a shout out to, though, speaking of GTA 6, they are going to drop a trailer. It was announced by Rockstar Games that they are going to release the trailer for GTA, for Grand Theft Auto, of course, Grand Theft Auto 6 in early December. And it is early December, you guys. Today is December 1st, technically. So I can't wait for the trailer for for GTA 6. So firstly, I want though to give a shout out. Speaking of scary video games and favorite video games, I want to give a shout out to the Quarry and its makers. That was my game of the year. Truly, the Quarry is so perfect. I bragged a lot. I brag a lot about NBA 2K, but the Quarry, the horror video game, the Quarry, for all those who played that was a fantastic video game, and I love it. My next thing, as I talked about on the podcast, is Friday the 13th, you guys. And no, not the movie, not the franchise, but the game, which is like the movie though, which is basically the same thing as the movies. If you played the Friday the 13th, the Jason video game, you know what I'm talking about. Jason in a game, you can't beat it. And I mean, it's not cliche or muddled over either. It's almost overly perfect. It's overly done, and how I would make a Jason video game. It's definitely how I would envision a Jason video game if I dreamed of a Jason video game. It's too perfect almost. The playability of it is still amazing. Like the storylines and how you go about moving around as Jason, or the victims, is amazing stuff. Friday the 13th is, with that being said, excuse me, it's still amazing to me, the Jason video game. It blows my mind. I won't even replay it because it's that amazing, by the way. But yes, Jason the video game, it's such a great video game. It's truly unexplainable. I brag on Friday the 13th all the time. How you can basically play different scenes to the movie. As a side note, just to prove my love for the Friday the 13th video game, the stargazing. I believe that was even like part 5 in the chapter 5 or something. But when you did the whole thing with the girl sitting out by the in the cabin and sitting out by the water, by the lake, and sitting on the ledge, the platform there, the stargazing, yeah, and you were Jason and you had to hide behind the in the woods there and all that. It's truly something, the Friday the 13th video game. Now, special shout out, with that being said, of course, I'm talking about horror video games and all that, and scary stuff. Shout out to to a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the newest game, obviously in the horror genre, here. TCM, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is a great game. I was skeptical at first. Like, how are they going to make a game out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre? But after playing the Quarry and Friday the 13th, it certainly can be done. It can be done, making a horror and scary video game. I was skeptic, of course, again, of Jason before I even played that. And we see how that turned out for me. The same thing has happened now with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I played it and I was amazed. It took me a few tries, to be honest, and it gets frustrating, escaping the house. I'm telling you, it gets frustrating escaping the house, you guys, as the victims, even chasing after the victims as the family too. So it gets frustrating, but I love the game. I respect it. It's great. It really is, especially when you do get close to escaping, or even in the midst of getting out of the house. The suspense is scary indeed. Now let's get into some more scary stuff. I want to end my discussion on scary movies. I did a podcast in celebration of Halloween, which was 4 weeks overdue, but I did it, you guys, and I have to admit, it was an enjoyable podcast to do. I enjoy doing my movies podcast because, I love, movies, and I love going to the movies, all of that, and I love scary movies, of course. And I'm actually going to watch movies, after I finish this roundtable discussion, actually, all day and night. I'm going to obviously transition from scary movies to holiday movies, of course, since it's December and Christmas time is rolled around. But speaking of the scary movies, it was really a Halloween thing. Speaking of Halloween, I was saying on the podcast, how Halloween is my least favorite holiday, and I was talking about the holidays. Well, today is, it was Thanksgiving it was Thanksgiving a week ago, of course. So I hope you all, by the way, enjoyed your Thanksgiving, just as a side note, just, for your information. On my podcast, though, I talked about my top 10 favorite movies, and I won't go into, great detail here about each one, but I will list them in case you missed it. My top 10 favorite movies were, Scary Movie, Thriller, Freddy, The Nightmare on Elm Street, of course, the classic Freddy Krueger. I love Freddy Krueger. Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees, Chucky, Psycho, Bates Motel, Clue, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and last but not least, Get Out. Get Out is 10th on my list. I had to pay homage to it, just for my modern folks. And I'll, I won't like obviously, go down the list of everyone here, but I will explain my logic and choices here. I had to kick things off with Scary Movie because, as I mentioned, it is the Scary Movie, and I am a huge fan of the Wayans brothers, of course. Scary Movie is indeed scary and funny. But let's get to Thriller also, which was a special choice, because of course it's Michael Jackson's Thriller. It's a special choice because it's MJ. It's only right that I include that on my list of favorite scary movies. Of course, love and peace to the great Michael Jackson always. Speaking of scary movies and quintessential scary things, also, I am indeed a huge fan of Freddy Krueger, as I said. The whole dream thing, the Christmas, / Charlie Brown sweater, and the knife for nails. I mean, just great stuff. Freddy is classic, and again, my favorite. My absolute favorite horror figure, by the way. Now, with that said, I like the other classics as well, apparently. Friday the 13th, Jason and Chucky are two horror legends. I had to mention those. And John Ritter or Jack Tripper for my cool kids in the room. You guys, I love John Ritter, by the way. A huge fan of his work as a person, just watching television. So I just want to say, of course, rest in peace, by the way, to John Ritter. And then there were the other movies. So back to my movies, there were the others, Psycho, Bates Motel, Clue, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Get Out. I do want to talk, though, I said I wouldn't run down everyone, but I do want to talk about Bates Motel. You guys, I love Bates Motel. I live for Bates Motel. It was based off of Psycho. But I love how it was, a television series. The story of Norman Bates and then being placed in the, in the aesthetic of modern TV in the context of a television series. I love the show. I watched every part of it. And it is quite something, quite suspenseful and scary and thrilling. The only thing I love more than Bates Motel, perhaps, is Get Out. Or even, Freddie Highmore, actually the new show that Freddie Highmore is on, The Good Doctor. So, shout out to Freddie Highmore, by the way. The only thing better than Bates Motel to me is The Good Doctor. But not even that, though. Bates Motel to me tops everything. But again, my respect and admiration. Speaking of Get Out, though, I do want to touch on Get Out before I end my roundtable discussion here. Again, my respect and admiration for Jordan Peele is up high. Like way up high. He's a genius. I mean, Us and Nope, and of course Get Out, which is brilliant. The representation and meanings and concepts and themes in his films are out of this world. And the films are good and creative. Get Out is very good. A great mix of horror, with a satirical comedy take to it, very much so like the Wayans, Richard Pryor even, the satire in comedy and comedy's ability to turn something very serious into something, kind of funny. But again, it's really the deeper meaning too of Peele's work that draws me in, the art and brilliance of it. I mean, Childish Gambino's Redbone playing in the beginning of Get Out, while Daniel, Kaluuya, is washing his face, and Daniel Kaluuya's face, of course, is creative and brilliant and beautiful. Art, I forever respect Jordan Peele, and am waiting for more films. The only film of Jordan Peele's that I didn't mention, by the way, in my list of scary movies is Candyman. And that's because, I have another big secret, you guys. I don't like Candyman. I'm legit scared of him, and I do not want to say his name. No, I don't want to say his name 5 times in the mirror. The bugs in his mouth, I just, yeah. Candyman just wasn't for me growing up. I didn't like the whole thing. I didn't like saying Bloody Mary either in the mirror. So yes, Candyman just... Growing up, Candyman, ironically, was just not something I was into. And that's not to knock Jordan Peele's, obviously, his remake. Jordan Peele is back to Jordan Peele. He is a genius. But no, I was not a Candyman fan growing up. With that said, you guys, I'm done with the movies. Go have a good night and watch something scary. I might get up now and go put on my Michael Jackson Thriller jacket, my varsity jacket that I do actually have, by the way, upstairs. And and actually, when I finish with this roundtable discussion, I may get up and do my Thriller zombie dance, of course. But yes, go watch something scary, or go watch a Christmas movie, go watch a holiday movie, and of course, last but not least, or go watch wrestling, of course. Or of course, basketball, go watch the NBA, you guys, go watch the NFL. And that's all I have for you guys on this roundtable discussion. Again, thanks for listening to my 4 podcast episodes, which took me forever to drop. And I have my roundtable here as promised, so in my microphone. But yes, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you all for watching, again, for watching this video also.